Let's start at the beginning. What are French seams? French seams are essentially sewn twice. The raw edge of the first seam is encased within the second seam. It's a very neat and clean finish. And fun fact about French seams, French ateliers refer to this seam as couture anglaise, which means English seam. French seams are perfect for any sort of sheer or lightweight fabrics like organza and silk. And they're also great, they would give a really nice clean finish for medium weight fabrics like linen and cotton. I'm using linen for my skirt. However, because the seam is essentially sort of 4 layers of fabric doubled up together, it can get quite bulky, so I wouldn't use it for heavy fabrics or any sort of wool. So for heavy fabrics, you just do a straight stitch and overlock or bowing to the seam. French seams are also, they're a bit hard to get around curves, so if you have got very curved parts of your skirt somewhere, sew the first seam, remember there are 2 seams, and then follow these tips. Trim the first seam allowance. You would usually trim the seam allowance in half after you sew the first seam, but for curved seams, trim the seam allowance even more so it's much closer to the stitching. This will allow you to bend and manipulate the fabric more as you start to curve it. Tip number 2, press and pin in small sections. If fabric is fighting you, press what you can and then pin it in place, and then move on to the next section. Then, sew your second seam slowly. It's really easy for puckering to occur around curves, so check what you're sewing as you go. And if there's some puckering, don't worry, just unpick that section, so maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, so an inch either side of the puckering. Smooth it out, give it a good press, and resew it. Before you start sewing, French seams, remember you've got to have a 1.2 centimeter or half an inch seam allowance, not 1 centimeter. It needs to be slightly bigger. Step 1, with wrong sides of the fabric together, pin the seams together. 2, using a straight stitch, sew a seam at a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Remember to backstitch at the beginning and end to secure your seam too. 3, trim the seam allowance in half. Be careful not to leave any threads. This is a good habit to get into so they don't poke through the finished seam. 4, fold the fabric with right sides together, press the seam flat so you have a really nice clean edge. 5, pin the seam in place to make it easier to sew. 6, using a straight stitch, sew a second line of stitching with a 6mm, so 1/4 inch seam allowance, and your raw edge should be inside. Remember to backstitch at the beginning and the end to secure your seam too. 7, press the seam to one side to finish. And with French seams, yes, they may seem to take a bit longer, but as you get better at them, they're actually a much nicer, cleaner finish. And as you get more practice, you'll be able to start using French seams on beautiful organzas and silks and crepes. So they do get easier as you practice, and they are a beautiful finish, so it's worthwhile getting the skill in your belt. If you need more pattern cutting help, head to my website, CLIQDPatternKits.com, and subscribe to my newsletter. Then I'll send you the 10-step pattern checklist I use before sending my patterns to production, as well as a discount code to get 10% off your first CLIQD Pattern Kit order. I've got lots more pattern making and sewing videos coming up, so subscribe to my channel to learn how to bring your designs to life.